In Root County, Colorado, in the Elk River country under the Park Range, the men of Hans Peak stopped tipping their hats to Inger Whitcomb on the 11th of March, 1889, which was the day her husband died. She noticed it inside of a week. She stopped waiting for them to start again inside of a month. She was 24. She had been born Inger Dahl in Jutland, in Denmark, and had come to America at 21 with a trunk and 11 English words, and had come to Colorado in the April of 1888 to marry a man she had corresponded with for 9 months and had never once laid eyes on. His name was Tom Whitcomb, and he was a decent man, and he was 34 years old, and he was dead of pneumonia 11 months after the wedding, and that was the whole of her marriage. What he left her was 640 deeded acres on the Elk River, a 2-room house with a good stove, 29 cattle, and a note at the Routt County Bank for $1,900 falling due on the 1st of April, 1890. What he also left her, though nobody put it in the inventory, was a reputation. The Whitcomb place was known in that county as bad ground, and it had been known so for 11 years, and there were men in Hans Peak who would tell you plainly and without any embarrassment that the ground was cursed. Tom Whitcomb had run 90 head when he married her. He had run 29 when he died. He had lost the rest across 2 springs, and he had never been able to say why. And he had gone into the winter of 1888 a beaten man, and had not had the strength in him to fight a fever off in March. She found the slate on the 9th of April. It was in Alton Purdy's store, which was also the post office and the freight office, and effectively the bank of last resort for anybody in that country who could not get to Steamboat, and it hung on the wall behind the counter where the credit accounts were chalked up. And it had always had a few standing wagers on it, because Hans Peak was a mining camp before it was anything else, and men in mining camps will bet on which of 2 flies leaves a windowsill first. On the 9th of April, 1889, the slate said, Whitcomb Place, gone by 1 April, 4-1. Inger Whitcomb stood in front of that counter with a list in her hand and read her own name on a wall in chalk, in a room with 6 men in it, and every one of those 6 men watched her read it. She bought 40 pounds of flour, a tin of coffee, and a paper of needles. She said thank you. She carried it out to the wagon herself, because nobody offered, and she got up on the seat and turned the team and drove the 11 miles home, and she did not cry until she was past the second creek crossing, and then she did, and then she stopped, and the narrator sets that down because it is true, and because pretending she took it well would be a disservice to what she did afterward. There was one man in that store who had not watched her read it. Gideon Frayne was 39, and he had been standing at the far end of the counter with his back to the slate on purpose, and when she came in he had taken his hat off, which no other man in the room did, and he had kept it off the entire time she was in the building. He came out to the Whitcomb place on the 14th of April, which was 5 days later, and he stopped his horse at 40 feet and stayed on it. Mrs. Whitcomb, I have got something to tell you, and it is going to take about 4 minutes, and then I will go, and I would ask you to hear the whole of it. You may say it from there. I intend to. He put his hands on the horn. In the spring of '86, I ran 310 head on the Willow Creek Range, which is the next drainage north of this one, and it was everything I had and about 11 years of work. Between the 9th of May and the 2nd of June of that year, I lost 280 of them. They went down in the same way, all of them, and it took about 2 hours from the first stagger to the end, and there was no sign on them and no sign in them, and the man from Denver could not tell me one useful thing. Inger Whitcomb had come to the edge of the porch. That is what happens here. That is what happens here, Gideon Frayne agreed. And I have spent 3 years finding out why, because I had nothing else to do with my time after 86. And I have got the answer. And I have not given it to anybody in this county, because nobody in this county has asked me a question since I went broke. He looked past her, at the meadow. It is a plant. It is that tall blue thing that comes up along the wet draws in the 3rd week of May and stands about 4 feet and flowers purple. Larkspur, it is in every draw on this place, and it is in every draw on Willow Creek, and it kills cattle, and it kills them in the spring when it is green and there is nothing else up yet, and it will kill them every single year until there is not one left. She was quiet a moment. Tom did not know this. Tom did not know this. Nor did I in 86. Nor does one man in that store, and every one of them will tell you this ground is cursed, and they will keep on telling you that until the end of time, because a curse does not require a person to go and look at anything. And what do I do about it, Mr. Frayne? Gideon Frayne was quiet for what she later worked out had been about 11 seconds. There is one thing that will graze Larkspur ground and not go down in it, he said. And I am not going to say the word to you, ma'am, because if I say it I am putting it in your head, and you have got a hard enough year in front of you without me handing you the fastest way to make the whole county hate you. Say the word. Mrs. Whitcomb, Mr. Frayne, I have got $1,900 falling due in 51 weeks, and my name in chalk on a wall in Purdy's store, and I do not think there is much left that this county can withhold from me. Say the word. Sheep, said Gideon Frayne. She did not decide that day. She decided 11 days later, on the 25th of April, standing in a draw on her own place with a 4-foot stalk of tall larkspur in her hand that she had walked 2 miles to find, having satisfied herself that the man had told her the truth about at least one thing. Then she wrote 3 letters. The 3rd of them went to a wool outfit at Rawlins, Wyoming, and it proposed that they place a band of ewes on the Elk River on shares. She to furnish the range and the herding and the winter feed, they to furnish the sheep, the increase, and the clip to be divided in halves. They wrote back on the 19th of May and said they would send 1,200 head and a man. The sheep came over Buffalo Pass on the 11th of June, 1889, 1,200 head of Rambouillet Cross ewes with lambs at side, and the man who came with them was named Domingo Echendy, and he was 47, and he had been born at Baigorry in the Basse Navarre, and had been in America since 1878, and could handle a band of 1,200 with 2 dogs and a stick. The county learned about it inside of 4 days. What the county did about it was not violence, which the narrator sets down plainly, because there were counties in that decade where it would have been. What the county did was stop. They stopped selling to her at Purdy's. Or rather, Purdy stopped extending her the credit that every ranch in that country ran on from spring to shipping, and told her plainly that it was a matter of business. They stopped hauling for her. The blacksmith at Hans Peak found that he was booked through August. The 2 men Tom Whitcomb had hired every haying season did not come and did not send word, and the slate changed on the 21st of June. Alton Purdy wiped it with his sleeve and chalked it up again in front of her, and it said Whitcomb Place. Gone by 1 April, 8-1. She read it. She bought her flour. She said thank you. There was one exchange in that store in the whole of that summer, and it was on the 2nd of August, and it was with a rancher named Sowerby, who had 400 head on Willow Creek and $40 on the slate. Mrs. Whitcomb, he had his thumbs in his vest. There is men in this county been running cattle on this range since 73. There is men who fought for it, and you have been here 16 months, and you have put 1,200 head of woolies on the Elk River, and I want you to understand what that does. Sheep crop it to the dirt. Sheep foul the water. Where sheep have been, cattle will not graze after. Mr. Sowerby, how many head did you lose in the spring of '87? He stopped. That is not the question in front of us. It is the only question in front of us. You lost 60. Mr. Frayne lost 280 in '86. My husband lost 61 across 2 springs, and then he lost his nerve, and then he lost his life. That is 401 head of cattle on ground that will not carry them, and every man in this room has agreed for 11 years to call that a curse rather than walk up a draw in May and look at what is growing in it. She had her list in her hand, and she had not raised her voice at any point. I have 1,200 head on that place, and I will have 1,200 head on it in October, and they will not be dead, and you may call that whatever you like. Good morning. She went out. Behind her, Alton Purdy said something, and 2 men laughed, and Sowerby did not laugh, and it was noted afterward that he did not. The summer of 1889 on the Elk River had a shape to it, and the narrator will not pretend it was eventful, because the whole of its worth was in how little happened. Domingo Echendy took the band up onto the High Park in the last week of June, and stayed with them until the middle of September, which is what a herder does, alone in a wagon, for 11 weeks, with 2 dogs and a rifle, and a supply of bread, and a great deal of nothing. He was the first person in that country who talked to her as though she were an operator and not a widow. You will want to know why the wool outfit at Rawlins said yes to a woman they never heard of, he told her, in the 2nd week, over the wagon fire. It is because there is no range left in Wyoming that is not spoken for, and no herder they can keep on it, and because you offered halves, which is a bad deal for you, and because they think you will fail in the winter and they will take the sheep back off the estate. That is what you are worth to them. I tell you this because you should know what you have got in your hand. And what have I got in my hand, Mr. Echendy? 1 year, said Domingo Echendy. If you feed them through, and you show them a lamb crop, next spring you write to Rawlins, and you say 2/3 or I place them elsewhere, and they will give you 2/3, and then you are not a widow with sheep on shares, you are a sheep outfit. He poked the fire. You must not be grateful to people who are using you. It slows you down. Inger Whitcomb put up 91 tons of hay that summer, with a mower, a horse rake, and her own 2 hands, and a boy of 15 named Ansel Poole from a homestead down the river whose mother did not care what the county thought. It took her from the 14th of July to the 9th of September. She lost 11 pounds doing it. She had blood in both boots by the middle of August, and she wrapped her feet and went on. Because 91 tons of hay was the difference between 1,200 head living and 1,200 head dying, and there was nobody else in the county who was going to put it up for her. Gideon Frayne came by every 11 or 12 days. He never once brought a tool. That was deliberate, and it took her most of July to understand that it was deliberate. You are not going to offer to help me. No, ma'am. Every man who has come out here since March has offered to help me and then been offended when I said no, and there have been 4 of them, and you are the only one who has not offered, and I have decided I want to know why. Gideon Frayne leaned on the corral rail. Because in '86 about 9 men came out to Willow Creek and offered to help me, he said, and every one of them meant it kindly, and every one of those offers took a piece out of me that I did not get back. A man does not want help. A man wants to have not needed it. He looked at the meadow. I do not know if that is the same for a woman, and I have not got the standing to ask. But you have told this whole county to go to the devil, and you have done it without raising your voice. And I am not going to be the one that walks up here and says, Now, let me get that for you. Then what are you doing here every 11 days, Mr. Frayne?" "I am seeing whether it works," said Gideon Frayne, "because if it works then, I lost 310 head in 11 years for no reason at all, except that I was too proud to run sheep, and I would like very much to know that about myself before I get much older." She stood there with the pitchfork in her hand. "That is the most honest thing anybody has said to me in this country. It is not a kind thing. I did not say kind. The distance between them at the corral on that afternoon in the 3rd week of July was about 4 feet, and both of them were aware of it, and neither one moved. And Domingo Echendy came down off the side hill with the dogs at exactly the wrong moment, and stayed for supper, and talked about the price of wool. If you have come this far with Inger Whitcomb, stay a little longer, because what happens next is what turned it. And if stories of love that arrived quiet and cost something move you, the bell beneath this story is how we keep meeting like this." The clip went out in the 2nd week of July, and the Lambs went to Denver on the 4th of October. She cleared $2,140 against a note of $1,900, and the note was not due until April, and she paid the whole of it into the Routt County Bank at Steamboat Springs on the 11th of October, 1889, 5 months and 3 weeks early, and got a receipt and put it in her apron pocket, and did not tell one living soul. That was the decision, and that was the result, and it had taken 6 months. And it had not required a single thing from anybody in Hans Peak. Alton Purdy found out on the 28th of November, when the bank's paper came through the mail he himself sorted. He had by that time $1,240 of other men's money in a book against the Whitcomb place, 400 of it his own, and he had spent his share in August on freight stock, and he did not have it. He swore out a complaint on the 4th of December with the county sheep inspector, alleging that the Whitcomb band was infected with scab. The narrator will explain why that was the worst thing he could have done to her, because it is not obvious to a modern ear. Sheep scab was a quarantinable disease under the laws of the state of Colorado, and a flock found infected could be ordered dipped, held, or destroyed, and a complaint alone was enough to stop a sale, stop a shipment, and hold 1,200 head on a place through a winter with feed for 100 days. She had feed for 100 days. The inspector set his examination for the 23rd of December. The storm came in on the 22nd. It came out of the northwest over the Park Range at 2 in the afternoon, with the temperature at 11 above, and dropped it to 19 below by dark, and it put 21 inches down in 14 hours on top of what was already there, and it is remembered in that county. The band was in the lower meadow, which was the right place for them, and which is exactly why it nearly killed them, because sheep in a hard wind do not scatter, and they do not lie down. They drift. They walk with the wind until they meet a fence or a cut bank, and then the ones behind walk into the ones in front. And they pile, and a pile of sheep 3 deep smothers the bottom layer inside of an hour. And a man can lose 400 head in a night and never hear a sound. Inger Whitcomb had never seen it. Domingo Echendy had seen it twice, and had been talking about it since the 1st week of November, and she had listened, which is the entire reason there is a story here. They went out at 4 in the afternoon, and they were out until 9 the following morning. What they did was break the band. That is the whole of the technique, and it is brutally hard to do. You cut 1,200 head into bunches of about 200, and you hold each bunch against a windbreak, and you keep them from drifting. And you do it with 2 dogs and a lantern and your own body. And you do it for 17 hours in a wind that takes the skin off your face. The willows along the river were the windbreak, and there were 6 places along 3/4 of a mile where the bank made a pocket deep enough to hold 200 head out of the wind. And Domingo Echandi had walked that 3/4 of a mile in the first week of November, and had shown her every one of them, and had made her say them back to him in order. She had thought at the time that he was being thorough. He had been being thorough. On the night of the 22nd of December, 1889, in a dark so complete that a lantern showed her about 4 feet of the world, Inger Whitcomb walked her own river bottom by memory and put 200 head into a pocket she could not see. Gideon Frayne came up the river at 6 that evening. He had not been sent for. He came because he had been sitting in his own house at 4 o'clock watching the sky, and had done the arithmetic that a cattleman does, and had then done the other arithmetic, which was that there was 1 woman and 1 Basque, and a boy of 15 in that meadow, with 1,200 head. He worked the North Bunch for 15 hours, and he did not once ask her what she wanted him to do. He found Echandi, asked the Basque, and did that. There was one moment in the whole of that night when the 2 of them were in the same place at the same time, at about 3 in the morning, at the lantern by the wagon, both of them taking the 2 minutes a person takes before going back out. 41 years old, he said, and I have never worked sheep in my life until 9 hours ago. How do you find it? I find that I have been wrong since 1886, said Gideon Frayne, and I find that it is a great deal easier to admit at 3 in the morning than it will be at noon. Then he went back out, and so did she, and neither of them said anything else about it until February. They lost 41 head. 41 out of 1,200 in the storm of the 22nd of December, 1889, and there were outfits in that county that lost 1/3 of their cattle in the same night, and one that lost better than half. The county sheep inspector came up the Elk River on the 23rd of December through snow to his horse's chest, because he was a conscientious man, and because a complaint had been sworn. He examined the band for 3 hours. He found no scab. He found no scab because there was no scab, and there had never been any scab, and he had inspected sheep for 9 years, and could tell the difference between a flock that had been kept and a flock that had not. Then he asked to see the complaint again, and he read it again, and he asked Inger Whitcomb one question, which was whether she had had any dealings of a financial nature with Alton Purdy. She said that she had not, and that she had paid cash in his store for 8 months because he had withdrawn her credit in June, and that she believed there was a book on her. The inspector rode down to Hans Peak on Christmas Eve. The narrator would like to report that Alton Purdy was prosecuted, and he was not. A false complaint was a misdemeanor, and the county attorney had other business, and the year turned over. What happened to Alton Purdy was worse, and it had nothing to do with the law. The book came due on the 1st of April, 1890. And it came due against him, and he could not pay it, and the men of that county who had put money on the Whitcomb place going under discovered on the same morning both that they had lost and that the man holding the stakes had spent them. He sold the store in September of 1890 and went to Craig, and from Craig to somewhere nobody in Routt County ever troubled to find out. But the thing that finished him was earlier, and it was smaller, and it happened on Christmas Eve of 1889 in his own store with 11 men in it. When a rancher named Sowerby, who had lost $40 and did not much care, walked up to the wall behind the counter and wiped the slate clean with his coat sleeve. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said anything at all. Purdy stood there with his hands on the counter and watched a man erase his name. Inger Whitcomb was not in the room. She heard about it 11 days later, and her only recorded remark on the subject was that she was sorry to have missed it. Gideon Frayne asked her in February, and he asked her badly. "I have got nothing," he said. "I want that said first, because it is going to be said behind my back anyway. I lost 310 head in '86, and I have been 4 years working for other men, and I have got a saddle and a horse and $11, and you have got 640 acres free and clear and a half interest in the best band of sheep in this county, and there is not one soul in Root County who will believe I am asking you for any reason but the obvious one. I do not care what Root County believes." "No, ma'am. I have noticed that about you." He turned his hat over. "But I care, not about them, about whether it is true. Because I stood at a corral rail last July and told you that a man does not want help, he wants to have not needed it, and I meant it. And I have spent 7 months finding out that I meant it about myself and not about you, and that is a thing I am ashamed of." Inger Whitcomb crossed the 4 feet. What passed between them then was brief, and it was the first for either of them in a long while, and what broke open in her was not longing, but the plain, unbearable relief of being chosen by a man who had watched her do the whole of it alone, and had never once tried to take a piece of it. They were married at Steamboat Springs on the 8th of May, 1890. He never ran cattle again. He ran sheep with her for 34 years, and was by 1901 one of the 2 or 3 men in northwestern Colorado that other men wrote to about Larkspur, and he answered every one of those letters. And he never once in 34 years let anybody tell the story of the Elk River place without saying out loud that it had been her decision, and that he had been against it for about 11 seconds, and had never afterward been able to remember why. Domingo Echendy stayed 19 years and took a quarter interest in 1897 and brought 2 nephews over from Bigori and died at Steamboat Springs in 1922 and is buried there. They had 3 children. The eldest was a daughter. The slate came out of Purdy's store in the September of 1890 when the fixtures were sold off, and Inger Whitcomb bought it for $1.10 and carried it home in the wagon. She did not hang it on a wall. She did not keep it as a trophy, which the narrator wishes to be clear about. Because she was not that kind of woman, and because a trophy is only a wound you have decided to be proud of. She washed it, and she put it on the kitchen table, and her 3 children learned their sums on it, and her eldest daughter learned to write her name on it, and it was used every winter for 29 years by children who had no idea whatever that the first thing ever chalked on it about their mother was that she would be gone by the 1st of April. It is in a museum case in Routt County, Colorado, today. There is chalk in the grain of it that will not come out, and the card beside it says that it came from a store at Hans Peak and was later used as a school slate by a ranch family on the Elk River, which is true, and which is not the half of it. If your heart has ever leaned toward a story where love arrived quiet and stayed long enough to change everything, then this story was for you. Up on the Elk River under the Park Range, where the wind keeps the only memory of what was, the love between Gideon Frayne and Inger Whitcomb became the kind that does not need anybody to remember it to be real. Though that county remembered it anyway, every hard December. Every time somebody looked at a band of sheep on ground that had once been called cursed and had to be reminded whose idea it had been. If stories of frontier love that endured through hardship, prejudice, and the kind of silence only the West knows speak to you, follow the Lonesome Trail for more. Here, the love stories are quiet The courage is real, and the last word is always worth the wait. Until the next trail.